travelers gather to discuss topics and issues that affect our lives. The far side is not only a place, but a condition. It exists at the furthest reaches of the planet and at the edge of credulity. It is on the outskirts of the twilight zone and beckons to those with open and inquisitive minds. Stand by for transmission from the far side.
Howdy, howdy, friends and neighbors. This is your old pal B coming to you from deep jungles of Borneo. Suppose everything you knew was wrong. Suppose the proverbs, sayings, and quotes at the core of our culture didn't exist in the source material cited. Suppose Earth was a terraforming project and was now at the center of a massive legal battle. Stay tuned. But first, a big far side thank you to Robert, James, Samantha, and Noor. These good folks found the PayPal donate button and figured out how to use it. Radio Farside is a non-profit effort to bring real information and topics to our audience. It's all about opening our minds to new truths and new possibilities, and to find for ourselves what is hidden from us in the mainstream culture. If you like what we do here, and believe me, you will when you hear the guests we have lined up for you in the next couple of months or so, then drop a couple of bucks in our PayPal donate bucket. We'll turn it into a bigger and better Farside experience. And now on today's program, our guest is Christopher Tyreman. Christopher and his crew have stumbled on what they think is a new way to translate ancient Hebrew. And with more, they've set out to retranslate the Torah and other books in what we commonly call the Bible. And what they've found so far is, to say the least, earth-shaking. It challenges our core beliefs and moves far outside our comfort zones. Their efforts are called the Chronicles Project, and you can find links on the Farside blog that lead to their site and to other resource information. Warning, some people find this information very discomforting. But here on the far side, we examine any well-reasoned argument. Listen to what Christopher has to say and decide for yourself. Christopher, thanks for joining us on Radio Farside. How are you today?
I'm awake.
Well, that's good. It must be afternoon on your side of the world. It's a lot
easier for me because it's actually in the afternoon here, but it's really early in the morning for you.
It's all part of the fun and games.
Oh, yes. I'm glad the fun and games is on your side.
Yeah, and all I got is my poor Dr. Pepper to keep me going.
Yes, your expensive Indonesian Dr. Pepper.
Yeah, my $2 Dr. Pepper from the black market.
Yeah, seriously, if you ever need, we'll just send cases over and you can sell them and become rich.
Heck, you know, that's not a bad idea. I could sell them for $1 and make a huge go at it.
Seriously.
Well, Christopher, you are into something that is really interesting. You have a website called the Chroniclesproject.org.
Yes.
And for the past few years, you and your crew have been working on some pretty amazing stuff. Some might even call it extremely challenging or go even further.
Use the word revolutionary. It sounds so good.
Revolutionary? I like that. It certainly fits. But tell us a little bit about what the Chronicle Project is.
Wow, where to start on this? What the Chronicle Project is it's the discovery of what we call a self-embedded system in the ancient Hebrew language. The text that you would, for example, find the Old Testament had been written using. And within that language was a system which shows exactly what each word is supposed to mean, so that each word can actually self-define itself, which means that a person could not tell you what it is supposed to say. The word will tell you what it actually means, therefore preventing anybody from translating it incorrectly, in a nutshell.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a real mouthful, but how does it work? I mean, when I look at a Hebrew word, what about it is telling me what it means? How does that...
Okay. If you have a chance, to those that are listening, and go over to our website, the first thing you want to do is read what we have as our research notes. You'll find them on the website. To make it simple, what we discovered is that a Hebrew word is not a word. What it is it's actually a collection of words, and that each of what was called a letter, we now call it a glyph because it's a shape. It has a meaning attached to each shape. So if you've got 3 or 4 letters in what is called a word, it's actually a sentence describing whatever the word is about. And that gives you the ability to understand what it means.
Oh, I see. And now let me get this straight. Hebrew, most of the glyphs are really consonants, right? The vowels are like, what do they call them?
Hidden?
Well, they're like little marks above the word.
Yeah, I'll explain that to you for the listeners, make it a little simple. When the original language was written back thousands of years ago, put down on paper or page or whatever they were writing on, those little marks actually never existed. The language was understood back then. From what we can decipher, the language probably lost all of its rules around AD 70 when the Romans sacked Jerusalem. Everybody was dispersed. Most people were taken back to Rome and then put under Roman tutelage. So within a generation, the understanding of how the language actually was completely collapsed. Now, once the language collapsed, about 900 years later, 800, 900 years later, a group came along who said we have to come up with a system whereby we can make it so that the language won't degrade any more than it already has. Unfortunately, by that time, the understanding had already been lost. So what they were doing is putting these marks down to try to help people understand what the words at that time were believed to mean. And that system has carried forward. The idea of there being consonants or vowels, unfortunately, is not part of the Hebrew language. That's taking our understanding of known languages and trying to put it back on the Hebrew. But Hebrew doesn't work like our language. Our language in English is a phonetic language. And what that means is I pick up a rock and I call it rock. And then you memorize that word, and from now on you and I know that it's a rock. But without me passing that on to you, you have no idea, and there's no way of ever knowing what that word meant unless it had a picture next to it. The Hebrew language doesn't work that way. As I said before, each separate letter is actually a concept. And how we discovered this is we were working in ancient Hebrew and became very disgruntled with what I consider an inordinate amount of rules that do not function. And the rules are so complex that if you work in ancient Hebrew and you've been doing this for 20 years, you will still need those books to be able to read and decipher sentences. Mm-hmm. I began to have trouble with the concept that somebody who's been doing this for 20 years who is a professional, and the professionals of the world still disagree, and yet a 6-year-old boy who is herding sheep can speak it fluently. So I began to think, you know what, there's a problem here. There's several problems. Let me explain them. People who do this in universities and areas like that believe that the Hebrew language is a language that evolved from surrounding areas such as the Sumerians and areas like that, and grew up from their languages into the Hebrew language. Now, if that's true, then the texts in Scripture, which say that it was the first language, the language of Noah, and the language of Moses, and the language of even back to Adam, would then make that a lie. So we sat down and said to ourselves, okay, these rules aren't working. The language as it is written down, is, we're told, is the original language of Earth and not evolved. So what we are going to do is do something no one else has ever done. We're going to back away from all of the rules, pretend we've never seen the rules before. We're going to take a look at the language and say, are there patterns evident in the way that the language is constructed that show the construct of a higher power or a more intelligent entity, and see if those exist. So we began looking at the language just as it was and without using any of the modern rules. And what we came across was, and for people out there, if I'm going to give a standard book that everyone can look up, even on the internet, and that is the Strong's Concordance. And I'll give them this one. It would be number 5420 in the Strong's. Now, we don't actually use the Strong's ourselves, but it's for people to have a reference material out there. The word that they'll look up is to tear up. Now, you'll notice underneath that word, there's a lot of words that have to do with to tear. What we noticed was when the glyph on the end, when the third letter in the position of the fourth letter changed, what happened to the word changed. It became to tear up, to tear out, to tear down, to tear off, to tear into pieces or tear asunder, to tear away. And so when that was seen, Kim said to me, do you think it's possible that other words do exactly the same thing? So we began going through the dictionaries and looking, and sure enough, each time the glyph on the end changed, the action of the word changed in exactly that same manner. To make a long story short, after 3.5 years of dissecting 6,000 words and putting it all back together, it became evident that every single, what we call a letter, was actually a word. And so, I'll give you an example of how that would work. We take a 2-letter word with an aleph and a tav, aleph being the first letter of the aleph bet, and the tav being the last. We found that the concept to that for the aleph was the concept to begin, and the tav was the concept to continue along. So if you put the two of them together, you would get to begin, to continue along, and that was the English word to join.
To join.
So the whole language, when you read it, is actually tells you what the word means when you do it, and when that is done, it fits every single time in every single place where it is found. Unlike now, where a simple word like nathan, which means to give, has 84 different English words applied to it, and some of them so abstract that you'll find a sentence that says, would that God, from the word to give.
Coming out really tortured language, yeah.
Unbelievably complex. And when we found what we found, one word is all that was necessary in all of the places, and all of the problems and mistakes collapsed. And the text changed, and so we started applying that to the book of Genesis to see what would happen. And you can find that on our website. It's really quite fascinating what occurred.
Well, let me ask you this. How did you and your group happen to be sitting around one day playing with the Hebrew language? Where does that come from?
Well, being that we're Jewish, that's a standard thing. You read Torah, you study the language, and I had it one day when you read and there's two words spelled exactly the same, and one word will say, would that God, and the next word says, find thee safe. And it's exactly the same word spelled side by side. And we'd be given this complex tense declination of the male verb, whatever, as to why that's supposed to be. And it's the only time it would ever work is in that one spot. And I finally said, you know what? No, it can't be this complex. God is not that stupid.
Yeah, well, it sounds like all the declinations and the conjugations and all that sounds like the Latin influence from back in the 70s, 70 A.D.
Yeah, and you have to, which again, obviously the Roman input on that. When you look at what we've done, all of the complexity drops away. Mm-hmm. The language becomes very simple, and you no longer have the mistakes that were present in the Bible. And I know most people out there will say, wait a second, there aren't any mistakes in the Bible. And I'll give you a very simple one. If you want to go to the very first chapter of Genesis, it says that man was made on the sixth day, after the animals and everything else was made. If you go to chapter 2, it says before there were shrubs in the ground, before the animals were made, God made man. Now, it's obviously contradictory to itself. What happened is there's a word left out in chapter 1, that word that I mentioned before, at, which is the two letters to join. And that is right now considered untranslatable because it has no English equivalent from the Hebrew. Well, when we ran it, as I said, was the word to join, and so chapter 1, which is the construct of the Elohim, what they were doing during that time, it would then say, and was made to join the man on the sixth day. That would be Eve. And on the third day in the second chapter, this is the construct of Jehovah or Yahweh, and that would be the day that the man was made, and then the animals after him, and then he named the animals. So that apparent mistake disappears using the corrected translation, or as we like to call it, restoration.
Well, let me, just a quick aside, you mentioned Elohim. Now, that is a plural word, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay, so there's more than one Elohim.
If you're reading Hebrew, and if you have a chance to look at the letters, there's 22 letters. There's a little flag-shaped one, just like a flag, and it's called the Yod. And a Mem, which looks like a square box when it appears at the end of the word. And those two letters together pluralize a word.
Okay.
So that's how you know it's plural. So you'll find a normal Hebrew word, and then when you see those two letters on the end, that means it's pluralized. And it's been forever that people have been stressing, what does this mean? Because it's a plural word. They think it means God. The problem is that word is also applied to gods, as in little g gods. It's also applied to the word judges. Now that cannot be, and I'll explain why. Any of the names of God were considered to be holy names. And no Hebrew judge would have ever named himself the same name as the name of God, because that would have equated him with God, and that would have been blasphemy.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have been done. I mean, the Christians can see in the New Testament where Jesus simply said, I am, and they nearly stoned him for that.
Yeah.
So you can imagine actually calling yourself Elohim, if that really was the name of God, would have got a judge stoned. But it didn't. They did have that name. So if you use what we call the self-defining Hebrew system, which is what we found was there. And again, we didn't make this up. We simply discovered it was there. So we don't get any credit. It's not something that we came up with. We just found it. So here's how it works. You take the first two letters, which will be the, and I'm going to use the English sounds to make it easier for people. It will be an A and an L sound, Al. That would be to begin to. Those are the first two letters. So if I begin to you, that would be a response. First two letters are the word to respond to. The next one is a H sound, the H sound, and that means the object or purpose of. Well, the object of to respond to is authority. You have to respond to authority. So the word A-H-L is authority, and then as I said, it pluralizes with the next two letters, so it becomes authorities. So the word Elohim simply means authorities, but when you read our texts, we put in the word for the English, supreme ones, so that you didn't think it was as simple as a policeman or an authority or a government official. These were the authorities under God that helped construct the earth.
Yeah, these were not the Adam and Eve humans, in other words.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These are the life and death people.
Well, now that you've found this system and you guys are sitting around the kitchen table talking about this, what did you find? What started to fall out of the scriptures as you went through it and started doing this what did you call it? You called it the reconstruction.
Yeah, restoration.
Restoration, yeah.
Yeah. The reason I call it a restoration is because it's not a translation. A translation is when I sit down and I say, well, I personally feel comfortable with this word. A restoration is when we sit down and say, this word has to fit every single time that this appears, and that's the word that's described by this grouping of letters. So that's why we say it's a restoration, because it's not our choice, it's the choice that is given to us. And so I'll tell everybody out there right now, if you have any trouble whatsoever with having your paradigm moved on you, what you believe in, what you think is there moved, please do not go to our website. Because this isn't something that we made up. It's something that is mathematically provable. And if you go to the website and read it, it's one of those things that you can't forget.
Yeah, in fact, you have a really good system there. It has the Hebrew on the right side with the English word underneath each word. And then just a straight English text on the left side. And then down below, you put it in more natural language.
Yeah, paraphrase from the Eastern to the Western language. So what occurred is, when we first discovered this, I assumed that there was going to be some minor changes in the texts, correct some of the things that had bothered me. And instead, what we did is we gave each other a section without knowing what the section was. And then you were made to translate that sentence or whatever, and then just put it back in, not knowing, so that there couldn't be any bias in what we were doing, and then put it back together. And what came about emotionally was really shocking to us. At the same time, it was good to know what was really there, but again, it was extremely hard for us, because you have all of these texts memorized the way that they're supposed to be read, and then to find out what actually comes out of it is really hard, because it changes the story, even though it makes more sense. It is hard to have what you've been programmed to believe something says fall away. So again, as I said, I warn people if they're going to prepare themselves for that, because it's disconcerting. So when we went to Genesis and applied it, the very first word, in the beginning, was not the word in the beginning. And you can read it when it's there if you go to the website. It's the word to chronicle, to take something from your mind and to write it down so that it will be continuing along. And so it's the word to chronicle. And then putting in or translating words that have been left untranslated, the word at, as I mentioned before, it in the creation or the production of stuff for the to join the celestials and to join the earth. And the earth had existed for a long time. Now that alone is if we'd only translated that one sense, that would have been dramatic.
Yeah.
It says the earth is not 6,000 plus years old, that the earth is much older than that, which brings it into correlation with science, showing that the earth is obviously much older than that. But the time when they came to earth and they constructed everything that's here, that did happen 6,000 years ago.
Wow. So in other words, what it's saying, basically, is that the Elohim came and found the earth already here rather than constructing it out of the void.
Right. And they'd known about earth for a long time, it said.
Wow.
Yeah. And it becomes extremely difficult when you start doing this. You think to yourself, okay, what does the next line say? And so lines that were very confusing to me before suddenly made a lot of sense. One of the lines very shortly down in the chapter, and the Spirit of God fluttered over the waters. I'd always wondered, why would God's Spirit flutter over waters? When the line was translated properly, it was, and the Elohim drew in an atmosphere over the waters. The earth did not have an atmosphere when they came, and they put one onto the planet.
Holy cow. I mean, so we're an engineering project, basically.
We're an engineering project. Now, what's very interesting about this is I can then go back to one of the experts in the field and say, you've been telling everybody that this is just a group of myths and stories that people have made up over the last however thousand years, and Moses decided to write these stories down, and that's all they are, is myths and stories. So I want to ask you, how does somebody sitting around a campfire a couple of thousand years ago even understand that an atmosphere needs to be put on a planet?
Yeah.
That's not possible.
That even the concept that they were sitting on a ball floating around a star.
Exactly.
I mean, that's a little advanced for a couple of shepherds.
Yeah. The concept that when they came, our star was not working and that they reignited our star.
Huh.
You see, if somebody's doing a creation story, they just have their God create the star. There wouldn't be a burned out one there, because if there was, where did it come from?
Oh. Wow, very quickly, we're only a few sentences into the Old Testament, and we're already into some really wild territory.
Extremely wild.
Well, how far have you gotten on this? Where are you now as far as the not the translation, the
restoration.
Restoration, thank you. It's a little early for English here.
Yes. What we have on our website, I believe, is up to chapter 11. We're actually into chapter 12 already for stuff that's been fully completed, that we're fully comfortable that we've got exactly the accurate English word for. But as far as the actual Old Testament itself, a lady contacted us from the U.S. and created a computer program whereby if we have a word that we know is correct, we can enter it into that computer, and she entered all of the Old Testament, and linked every word together that was the same, so we can enter that word that we know is correct, and it will put that word every place it's found in the Old Testament. So the word ought, which I keep mentioning because it's a very simple one that they said was untranslated, appears over 13,000 times in the Old Testament that have been left untranslated except when they needed it to, and then it was the word with or to accompany or whatever they needed it to be translated as. And when they didn't want it translated because it screwed up their idea of what that sentence should say, let's say they left it on. So with all of the words that we found so far and entered into this program, in essence, we have about 53% of the Old Testament done.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, the question comes up, why is the Bible so screwed up? Why is what we have so far away from what you guys are finding?
Personally, I think part of it starts with the fall of Jerusalem, where the understanding of what the language actually said was lost. And they tried to reestablish the understanding of language using the Hebrew words found in other languages that still were in existence. The problem is when you translate a word across to another language, it gets subtly changed. And I'll give you an example. If you were saying in French, mon coeur est malade, my heart is sick. To me in English, that would sound like you're having a heart attack.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that. It means you have a stomach ache.
Yeah.
And so there's where you would have a problem. When you translate across from one language to another, you would sometimes lose concept. And so we're working with items that were from the Greek, and then they assumed, number one, that the guy doing the Greek knew what he was doing. I think that's a bad belief.
Yeah.
And then also from the Latin texts, which again were taken from the Greek text, which again, it's a game of telephone. And by the time they put it together, that game of telephone had gone many centuries. Then when the King James came along, they were under extreme pressure to get it done very quickly. In fact, most of the King James is actually based on previous works from people who have been working on Bibles before them. So the King James was constructed within 3 years, 3.5 years, and there's a lot of mistakes. They were working more for poetry than they were for accuracy. And it's very evident if you study the actual Hebrew that there's no way that some of the words which are translated can be that way.
But they were thrown in for convenience sake.
Very convenient. And there's words like odd, which is the A sound and the D sound. And if you look most times, it has to do with somebody who is ruling, such as Adonai. But when that word is found odd in Genesis, they translate it mist. But it's only translated mist once.
Wow.
And every other years, it's translated something completely differently, so that it says, and a mist came out of the ground and watered the whole earth. And the actual thing, it says, and ruler arose from the earth and from the water on it. So it's actually talking about Adam, Ad, and then on the end, so Adam. Ad means to rule, and the M sound is to, would be, in the way that it's set up, it would mean those, because it's a pluralizer. So the name Adam doesn't mean ruddy, it doesn't mean earth, it means to rule those. Hence showing an understanding of the fact that Adam was created to rule the planet.
To rule the planet, yeah. Which actually fits with other texts further on in.
Yes.
You know, go forth and multiply, and, you know, whatever you call them, that's what they'll be named, and basically you're in charge, buddy, this is your ball.
Right. Now, what came out of that, which is very interesting, is in the Bible, the way it is right now, they have Eve talking to a serpent.
Yeah, yeah.
The reason that they do that, and I'll give the Bible translators this one, is the word nakash, or nakash, as it's pronounced properly, is the word that is used for snake or serpent. But because it's a description, it means to proceed to project. So in other words, to project before you get there. And the word can be applied to a snake because it sticks its tongue out before it approaches you. As it's approaching, the tongue arrives first.
Okay, I can see that.
But that same word can be used in other things that also do the same. So in the case of this, it's not a Nakash, it's the Nakash. And that is very important because the Nakash, the one to note, it means of all of the Nakash, this is the big guy.
This is a special one, right?
Right.
Same in English. I mean, A and D are completely different concepts.
Exactly. Versus a Batman versus the Batman. The Batman. We all know who you're talking about. So, if you're a comic fan, that is.
Yeah.
So, we had a really difficult time with this, understanding what that word was meaning. We knew it wasn't a snake because of the rest of the text around it. And then when we finally corrected one of the texts, it became apparent that he had come, it said, to release the animals. While Eve was watching, he was releasing the animals that had been created upon the earth.
Wow.
And then it dawned on me one day, this was the guy in charge of what preceded being projected. And most people will say, well, what does that mean? Answer, very simple. They came, the sun was no longer giving off light, and so they did what was necessary, and it began to illuminate. Hence, he was in charge of what preceded the sun beginning to project. Then, they needed to put an atmosphere on the planet, so they took it from wherever they did, and they projected it onto the earth. Then the ground was ready, and they projected the seed and the plants into the ground. Then the animals were created, and the birds were projected into the heavens, and the animals were projected out onto the land. Do you understand?
Okay, I'm with you.
This is the guy who was in charge of everything up until the point of release.
Well, in effect, that kind of fits in with the whole concept of Lucifer supposedly being like the brightest star in the heavens, and he was God's right-hand man, and the apple of God's eye, to use a pun.
Yep.
So
the sense of his attention.
Yeah, you get the sense. Okay, this Nakash is like a number 2 guy. He's second in command over this planet.
He's the foreman of the development of the earth.
Wow. Well,
he was the overseer of this whole project.
Yeah. But what's the whole deal with the apple? Or the apple is actually not in there, but the forbidden fruit.
Yeah, there is a fruit. Now, in the Bible it says there's 2 trees. In the corrected text, there's only 1 tree. There's no plural on the tree. And this is the tree of the knowledge of to be satisfied, they translate that as good, or to fear, they translate that as evil. And so, if you consume of this fruit that is on the tree, it immediately downloads into your brain all of the information stored within this. And instantaneously you will have all of the knowledge of what's going on everywhere, and you're either going to do one of 2 things. If you're a mature person, you'll be satisfied with the answer. If not, this is so overwhelming that you will go into fear because you're not ready for the truth. And
kind of like the Chronicles Project.
Yeah. And I wasn't ready. And so God, or ruler of all, says to Adam, don't eat of this. Okay, that's the one thing. This is in the middle of the garden right now. Don't eat of this. You're not ready for it. In the Bible, it has them eating of it, realizing they were naked. That's not what it says. The word is not naked. If it was, then in the very next sentence, where it says, and the serpent was the most cunning of all creatures, is exactly the same word as the word naked, plural. So it should properly be translated, the serpent is the most naked of all creatures. Obviously, the word is mistranslated, and it was. What it actually says happened is that they ate of this fruit, and wisdom came rushing to them. Wisdom, knowledge came rushing to them. And the serpent said, the reason I don't want you to eat of this thing is because if you do, you'll become like them, knowing good from evil. What actually happened, just in the Nakash, the second in command, said, they don't want you to eat of this because if you do, you'll understand what they understand and you'll be able to translate. You will become just like them. which they're the angels.
So the idea was there's supposed to be a segregation between them, right? Adam and Eve were not initially supposed to understand the language of the Elohim.
They were not supposed to have the knowledge. So what happened is Eve ate, and then she handed it to Adam, who was standing right next to her, nice guy, because they were told they'd die, and he said, yeah, honey, go ahead, have the fruit, see what happens. Then when she didn't die, he said, okay, that's great. So he ate of it. And then instantaneously they had the knowledge, and they realized that whatever it was that they understand, that they simply chose and became just like the angels. They began to glow and give off light. And they freaked out, and they hid in among the tree of the knowledge of being satisfied or to fear, because the tree is glowing. So the best place to hide if you're suddenly glowing like an angel and your eyes are white and your hair is white is to hide among the glowing tree. And God comes into the garden and says to them, where are you? And they said, we're here, we're in the tree, but only you come forward. You have to leave them behind because we're afraid of them now because we've become like them. And God comes forward and said, who told you how to do this? And they said, it was the Nakash, the second in command. Now, why the second in command did this was very simple. God was the ruler of the earth. He was the one that set it up. And then he gave man a kind in charge of the earth, hence his name, to rule those. And the Nakash knew that if he could get Adam and Eve not to follow the ruler's orders, but his orders, that would be mutiny, and they would then be under the Nakash and would have separated themselves from God by choice. So knowing how the law worked, the second in command got Adam and Eve to take his orders instead of God's orders, ate from the tree, got translated. God then turned them back to normal. He clouded their mind with something to turn them back. But he, to the Nakash at this point, and this is where the restoration is very interesting. In your Bible, God comes along and he says, I curse the earth because of what you've done. You know, make God the bad guy. In the restoration, it says, God says to the Nakash, you have cursed the earth by this action. Why? Because the Nakash put Adam and Eve under him. That makes him the ruler of the planet and cuts out ruler of all, God. That means God can no longer interfere without a human asking him, and that means he cannot protect us unless we ask, and that curses everything on the planet, which is why bad things happen to good people.
So wait a minute now. First of all, we find out that the Earth is basically an engineering project, and now we find out that the whole situation with Adam and Eve and the serpent and everything is basically a legal problem.
It's a huge legal problem. And so God has to figure out how to bypass this legal problem. So what he needs to do to bypass the legal problem, using the law, because God can't break his own law, and a lot of times in the Bible it appears he is breaking his own law, but I can tell you straight up front he's not. It's mistranslation or a misunderstanding of what's occurring. He has to find a way to get the earth back from who is now called Satan. Satan is a Hebrew word, Satan. It simply means the adversary. It's this name. And I'd like to correct another name because people hear the word Lucifer and they think it means shining one or morning star.
Yeah.
It doesn't. A Lucifer is a moaning or a crying that is done as somebody is being led to execution.
Keening.
No execution, beheading.
Oh, beheading.
Beheading.
But keening, like the real loud kind of wailing?
Yeah, but that's not the kind that you would do if somebody had died and you missed them. The kind that you do when you're a coward and you're screaming because you know the fate that you're about to experience.
Oh, okay.
Okay? And so he is, where that scripture appears, he is being led to execution.
Okay.
And that is why he is called the Lucifer, because he's a big coward, screaming his head off because he knows he's about to meet his end.
His doom, yeah.
His doom. And so that's not a name of how glorious he is. That's a name of how big a pussy he is. He's just a wimp.
Well, isn't that interesting? That kind of puts a whole different spin on things.
Yeah, people will blame Satan for a lot of stuff, but straight up front, I want everybody out there to know you need to de-deify this entity because Satan is a single person, single entity. He is not omniscient. He is not omnipresent. He is a single entity who is the head of what is on the earth that he is in charge of.
Wow.
And that's a big difference than this guy who can appear in your bedroom and make you do evil things. No, he's not doing that.
Yeah, cloven hoof and tail and all that.
Yeah, no. This is all mythology that's made up.
Hmm. Well, it sounds like, I mean, the more we get into this, it sounds like there's a whole lot of this mythology going on.
And sadly it is, because it's changing what is really there and making it so that it's all fairy tale.
Yeah,
and
but
that
it really makes your head spin once you start realizing what exactly is going on.
Right. Now, if you want to follow all the way through the Bible, I'd like to explain certain things to people, especially the Christians that are out there.
Uh-huh. Well, let me ask you one thing, because before we get into that, now, we discussed before that, you know, Earth is an engineering project, and you mentioned it was one of many.
Yes.
Where does that come in?
There is a Jewish text that is not part of the Bible that is talking about God's creations, and it says that he is in charge and has done this to over 18,000 planets, and that would be at the time that text was written, which is like about 1,000 years ago.
Wow, he's a busy guy. Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to get that in there.
That's fine. What the Old Testament prophesies is that a prophet greater than Moses would come in the end of days to put everything right. And Jesus comes along, and when he gets here, he does a fast for 40 days, and then the Satan appears to him, and he takes him up, and he says, if you see all of the world, all of the nations here,
mm-hmm.
I will give you all of these if you will bow down and worship me. Now, the reason I mention that is it shows you that even at that time, it was understood that the earth was still fully, legally owned by the Nakash.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, what is the Mashiach, as the Christians call him, the Messiah here for? Answer is simple. It's all a matter of law. He has to live his whole life here on the earth, not break law once, which it says he didn't. Then he is executed. Once a man dies, he is then judged. He was then judged and found that he had not broken any law. A man who has not broken any law has not sinned. If you have not sinned, sin causes death. He can't remain dead. So he rises from the dead. Now we have a human on the planet that is no longer under the laws of the earth, because once you die, you pass away from that.
Mm-hmm.
But he's back alive on the earth, and he is in essence a household that is no longer under the authority of the Nakash. Anybody who comes to that household and says, there's two ways to get into a household. Way one, you get physically born from the father, and then you're part of the household. But if you can't do that, then way two is to come and say to the head of the household, I wish to be a bond slave, which is permanent for life, of that.
Uh-huh.
Once you are a bond slave, you then become a joint heir with the rest of the people in the household. You actually receive, by law, whatever the household has. So if the master of the house is no longer under the Nakash, then those who have entered into the household are no longer under the Nakash. Now you have people, Adams, to rule those who are no longer under the jurisdiction of the Nakash, who can then say to God, I want you to do whatever down here on the planet, and you give him legal right to do that. Which is, Jesus said to his apostles, when they said, teach us how to pray, one of the lines was, Father, your will be done on the earth as it is in heaven. Now you see, the word heaven is one of those words that we now have this idea of little angels playing harps in this fluffy cloud area somewhere. Not the word. The word would have been, Father, may your will be done on the earth as it is in the celestials. Because that's the Hebrew word that would have been used.
That would be the physical planets and stars and nebula and galaxies and everything else.
Yes, so Father, let your will be done. We give you access to have your will here on the earth, just like it is on the other 18,000 plus planets.
Wow, so basically God lost the earth in a legal battle.
Yes,
and Jesus is kind of like a warrant that allows him back in.
Right. Now we have two rulers of the earth, or two overheads of the earth. Now the problem is, you can't have two masters of the planet.
Right.
Legally, the only way that you can solve this is by the death of the other. And so you need a war. Now, because Satan knows that this war needs to be done, he has to divide up the earth so that you'll have the people that are in the household of the Messiah, and then you have to have the people that will go to his household, remain in his household, and then you have to have a war. In comes the Antichrist. Now, for the people that are listening out there who don't have a Jewish background, I'm going to fill some stuff in for you. There's a book called the Book of Enoch that you can find online, Book of the Watchers, and it's an expansion on what happened back in the time of Noah, where a branch of the Elohim came down, mated with women, and had the offspring of giants. That's chapter 6 of Genesis. And you can read in ours what it says also. And what happened is this group of the Elohim came down, a branch of the Elohim. They translate that sons of God, or sons of God, I think. And that they came down, and God, in what we restored, warned them, don't do this. You don't go down and make yourself gods to mankind. They did anyway. They had kids. The kids became giants. The giants infected the population. It was just horrible, and he turned the whole world to a complete mess. And God then, in order to save what little was left, took Noah and his family and the animals that had not been corrupted and put them on the ark. So when Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man, what he said is, those angels that sinned and were down here ruling the earth, if you read the book of Enoch, they were taken and they were bound, and a holding cell was built under the desert of Dudael called the Abyss. And they were chained there, it says, until the end of time for the judgment. Now, if you read in Revelation, it says that an angel descends and opens with the keys to the bottomless pit, and he opens it, and the beast comes out. The beast to Jewish people is known as an angel by the name of Azazel, and he was the one that caused the destruction of the earth. He was the abomination that caused desolation in the time of Noah. The Antichrist is described as the abomination that caused desolation. He was the one who was the head of the earth. He is not, and will be again. He and the others that were bound in the pit with him. And that's why it says, who can make war with the beast and win? How can you fight against something which can't die? So what Azazel does is he goes to the Satan, and the Satan gives him legal right to rule the earth, because the Satan doesn't want to take the punishment for doing this. So he lets the other guy do it because he's a coward. And Azazel and his boys set up statues of Azazel all over the earth, and you have to bow and bend your knee to the statue. You have to worship Azazel, and then you have to take his mark. And if you do that, you're on his side permanently, and that's how the earth gets divided up. Anybody who will not do that, they execute. And the reason they're doing all this is they figure if they can execute all of those who are God's people, then there will not be anybody of God on this planet, and then God will no longer have a legal right to the planet. But it doesn't that way. According to the book of Revelation, it ends up in the final war in the valley of Megiddo, and then the Messiah returns, and there's a great battle, and the forces of Azazel are destroyed, and they are subdued, and then God has ownership of the earth from that point on.
I mean, this makes it all sound like a claim stake, in the gold rush days, or the Kansas land rush. You go out and squat on your land, and that becomes yours as long as nobody gainsays you.
Yeah, exactly. So you get the idea. Now, what's interesting is we then took, with the understanding that we have, Revelation was originally written in Hebrew. And the reason that we know that is because of one word. It's talking about the Antichrist as the destroyer. And it says first, he is the destroyer. In Greek, his name is Apollyon. If Revelation had been written in Greek, it would have had his name is Apollyon, but in Hebrew, his name is the destroyer. So that tells you that this was written in Hebrew, and then a Greek word was given for the Greek reader.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, we realized that 666, you shouldn't be using the Greek construct to find out which letter is attached. You should be using the Hebrew word. So we went to Hebrew, and we ran it through, and what it came down to saying was, do not release him from the pit, or the one that is bound in the pit, depending on whether or not you translated it one way or translated the letters the other way. So either way, it said the same thing.
So the 646 is a word or a sentence referring to the one bound in the pit.
Yes, he bound in the pit.
Wow, that's interesting.
That's very important because everybody's running around going, Obama is the Antichrist, Bush is the Antichrist.
Well,
Hitler
that's true, but not the Antichrist.
Right, and what you have to understand is the word Antichrist in Greek, anti doesn't mean against, it means copy.
Right.
So how can somebody, if you read in Revelation what he looks like, it says that he has glowing white eyes and white hair, and that the light is pouring off of him, and that's what he'll look like when he comes back. How can you copy that if you're Obama or if you're Bush? I mean, George Bush doesn't look like that very often. His wife did.
Sometimes, yeah.
But not George. She had the hair down.
Yes, she does.
And so what you need is you need somebody who looks like that, be the Antichrist. And the only one that can do that is an angel. Is the only thing that looks like that according to Old Testament descriptions of angels.
So the angels basically are the Elohim, yeah?
Yes. Now, if you want, there's a Hebrew text of Matthew that the people in charge will tell you is back-engineered from the Greek, and you shouldn't bother reading it because it's not real. Well, we bothered to take a chapter from it and translate it. And I can tell you right now it's not back-engineered from the Greek because it doesn't say what the Greek translation says that we have in English. And that's actually posted on our site. It's chapter 24 of Matthew that's there when the disciples say to him, tell us what will happen in the end of days. And it's very interesting to read what it says will happen in the end of days. It's different than what's in our Bible.
Well, I mean, it just sounds to me like from word one that everything that we know in that book is wrong.
Well, the Bible has been translated in such a way to make sure that the Christian will never find the true God, and that the Jew will never find the true Messiah.
So it is basically part of the deception.
I would say it is. I used to think, like, we were very open at the start to thinking that the mistakes that were done were just mistake piled upon mistake, piled upon mistake.
Yeah.
But the further in we got, there's stuff that's just, you can't do that. When you've got two words exactly the same, and you translate them 3 words long, completely different, side by side.
Yeah.
That's not a mistake. That's on purpose. And the on purpose is starting to actually beat the potential mistake sections.
Yeah. Well, I know because I am a translator that's just wrong. You can't do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there is a specific concept for every word, every construction, and it has to be the same. It has to be consistent. Otherwise, there is no communication.
Yes, exactly. And that's the sad part. What is good about what we found, if the rest of it somebody is horrified by, it lets us see the magnificence of the construction of the language. And because we're in chapter 12 right now, I'm working in the story of Abram before he becomes Abraham. And the name Abram is amazing because depending on how you split it, and there are rules that we've discovered for how a word is split. But if you wanted to split it different ways, no matter how you split the name Abram, it says the same thing. So if you take the A sound, which is to begin, and the BR sound, and then an M, so it's A-B-R-M. If you take the A sound and say that it's a prefix, that would be to begin. The next 2 would be your main concept, the BR, it would be to produce. And the M would be those. So if you take apart that way, it's to begin to produce those. Now, if you take AB, A-B, and then RM and split it, because you can with names sometimes split words like that, then it would be to have seed, AB, to have seed, and then RM, ram, to mass.
Huh.
Now, if you take it the way that the rules that we found show us to be split, and that's take the first three together, Abra, it's A-B-R, then you would have the word to populate. And then the M is the word those.
Wow.
So no matter how you split it up, it says the same thing. He's going to have a bunch of seed and a bunch of people after him.
That's fascinating.
Absolutely fascinating, because it means that whoever gave him the name, whoever constructed the language, would have had to know ahead of time that the name he gave him would spell the same thing no matter what you did with it.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all of this is really interesting. I mean, I'm sitting here scratching my head, just bewildered by all the information.
And sadly, there's lots of it. I mean, we could go with this for 5-6 hours and not even touch what has been found out there, and literally the effect that it can have in a good way for somebody looking at the scriptures. In a bad way, I do need to touch on this, because we get letters from people and they say, so basically what you're saying is that nothing in the Old Testament is accurate, or is accurately translated. And the answer, sadly, is yes. So they say, well, what do I do? And my answer to them is, you do exactly what Abraham did. He didn't have it. King David didn't have it. None of these texts existed. These texts are the stories of the people who walked with God and followed God. They didn't have a text of the story of another person to read. So if you're out there and you're saying, what do I do if all of the texts are actually translated wrong? The first thing is, well, we have at least 12 chapters for you to read, which will help a bit, because it will reconstruct your idea of God from being this horrible, vengeful God to being a God who cares, has a plan, and is trying his utmost to get us back under his protection.
Well, and can people actually join in with you and work on this project?
Yeah, you know, actually, we have people all the time, they'll say, I have a favorite section. Do you mind if we work on it? We're like, this isn't our work. Anybody can do this. We still have not discovered all of the rules, and so for the average person, I'll tell you straight up front, the thing that is the kicker is we haven't discovered the rule on how to know which of the letters is a prefix and suffixes. So in other words, words that are at the front of the concept or the back of the concept that are separate from the concept itself. Put that in English, if the word the is in front of the word, the Nakash, rather than the H being part of the word. We still haven't figured out that rule, and the way that we ended up doing it is, if you read the words long enough, it becomes evident when you look at a word what the word is. So it comes from practice, sadly. But we have discovered certain rules, like no Hebrew word, main body of a Hebrew word is longer than 3 letters. That helped us go a long way. We also found out that after you have 2 letters, if the third letter is a yod or a vav, which is like one of the vav looks like a golf flag,
right?
And the yod looks like the flag without the stick. As soon as that appears, the word stops, and it's either the end of the word or it's a divider to the next letters that are attached after it.
I was going to say, because the original Hebrew doesn't have spaces in it, right?
No, it doesn't, because they collected it because each word is actually a description. So that's why there's no spaces, because each letter is a full concept. So when you've done the concept, then you go on to the next concept. Hence, you don't need the spaces.
And then as you read along, it just kind of builds one on the other until you get a full picture. Yeah,
as it goes. And for the average person, when you go to our site, it will be a little confusing at the start. But as I said, people have gone, and we do have a dictionary that we put up there of the words that we've done so far. It still hasn't been updated fully. We've got about 3 chapters we have to update.
Wow.
But the dictionary is there, the material's there, and we have actually had people go in and start working on their favorite verse. And then they'll email it to us and say, how close is this? And then we'll tweak it a little for them. Oh, you missed this. This should be divided here. And then send it back and let them work on it again. So if people want to do their own, they're fully welcome to. I want you straight up front. It's not going to say what you think it's going to say.
Yeah, and in fact, I know from personal experience that once you start reading this, you need to brace yourself.
Yeah, heavily brace yourself.
Yeah.
And I can sympathize with everybody out there, because every time we translate a new line, we have the joy of reading what it says the first time and then that horrible feeling of I don't know how you would describe it. It's just, oh, that's not there.
Yeah, everything has changed.
The most hurtful one for me so far, as in all of them, was when somebody wrote us and said, and we don't do this anymore, so please don't write letters, because we had to stop because we were jumping all over the place. And believe me, we wanted to do it because somebody writes and said, could you translate this one? And we're like, yeah, I want to translate that one. It's a good excuse. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody had written and said, that one's very important to me. Can you translate it? And I warned them up front. I said, look, I can only send you what's there. And I knew I was in trouble because that's since I was a kid. I loved that one.
Mm-hmm.
It was so poetic. And I knew we were in trouble the very first line when I realized the word shepherd was not even there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, where did they pull that one whole cloth out of thin air or what?
You have to understand that if you're allowed to make up whatever words you want, the translation goes a lot faster.
Yeah, well, that's true, yeah.
And so they have this word that they translated sheep, and then from there they worked to the word shepherd, but the word sheep isn't even there. But they used a rule to say, well, in this case, because of where it is, it's the 10th declination of the male. You get the idea.
Yeah.
So they said it's not actually the R-A-H word, it's the R-A, I forget if it's R-A-U or I'd have to go back. But they say in this case it's actually R-A-H, and in this case it actually means shepherd, not sheep, and it's just such a headache.
Oh, Lord.
So I translated it for the gentleman and sent it back, and he sent back, thank you, I didn't realize it would hurt that much.
Yeah.
And I said, believe me, I understand the pain.
Well, when you just in Genesis 1, you've already changed, all of humanity into an engineering project. God is obviously a physical being that can come down and walk around and hang out with everybody.
Yes.
We don't have the snake anymore. Now we have, another guy, the foreman, who decides he's going to run off and do his own little project.
Yeah. And he's a psychopath, by the way.
Well, yeah. If he screwed things up this badly, he would have to be.
Well, what kind of moron would actually screw over the ruler of what we know and steal a planet from him? I mean, hello, there's going to be repercussions sooner or later. He's smarter than you.
Well, I mean, if you got the Elohim coming down and intermarrying with human females, there's probably some kind of envy or lust or something going on. There's a very distinct human emotion involved, it seems.
Yeah, there is actually, and when we did the restoration, that actually became evident. It says that they looked down and saw, and they have it translated as they saw that the daughters of men were comely or something like that.
Yeah.
They actually did is the word daughter is not there. What they did is they looked and saw that the family lines of man were comely. In other words, they looked down and saw that a man could have offspring, and they would have offspring, and that this guy would be the head of this great nation. Coming, and they said, how cool is that? We can be the head of a great nation. And so instead of just watching like they were supposed to, they actually went, took wives, and were intending to make great nations of themselves so that they could be like gods.
Oh, this is just the quest for power. This is one of the oldest stories in history.
Yes, it's somebody who thinks they're smarter than God and goes against him. And a lot of people say angels can't do that. It's like, okay, come on. Read Revelation. 3rd of the stars of heaven fell with Satan.
Yeah, so obviously there's the ability. But I guess, is there any sense, because, you mentioned that God had 18,000 planets as part of his project. Is there some kind of sense that he's one of many, that there are other guys out there, other gods out there running around doing their own projects?
No, actually we don't. And that's, people need to understand, a lot of people listening to this might have a freak out that's like, wait a second, you can't tell me that God is not omnipresent, he's not omniscient, he's not, smaller words, you can't tell me he's not everywhere at once, you can't tell me he's not all-knowing, and he's not all-powerful. And believe me, I was raised with that concept. As a Jew, you're raised with that.
Mm-hmm.
But I cannot ignore what is His Word written down on paper. And what His Word says when we came, for example, to the Tower of Babel, which there is no Tower of Babel. There is a city of Babel where they had the towers reaching taller than anyone else had ever reached. Why? Because it says they discovered how to make bricks, and bricks, you can build a taller structure using bricks than you can any other way. And it says that God saw what they had done, and He went down so that He might understand and see what they had constructed. First off,
interesting.
First off, God had to go down. If He was everywhere at once, He wouldn't have to go down. He would already have been there. Second, He went down to understand. If God is all-knowing, He would have already understood.
Right.
Okay? People have to understand that just because we were taught things does not mean that that's what the Bible says.
Mm-hmm.
We have to stop going with the myth and go with the truth. And that's going to make you feel very unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
But what we have found is we have, first off, a God who has our interests ahead of everything else. We have a God who can hear us.
Mm-hmm.
We have a God who cares that our benefits be taken care of. He is a loving God who is interested in us. So He is not omnipresent. He's not everywhere at once. But He has greater capacity than any other being that we know of.
Mm. Wow, it's just fascinating stuff. I've spent several years now reading your site, which, by the way, since we've been talking about this, I don't think we've mentioned the site in a while. It's the Chronicle, singular, thechronicleproject.org.
Yes.
Yeah, so if people want to go over there, there is another one, and I mistakenly type in the Chronicles Project a lot, and it brings up something completely different. So make sure that you use the singular, thechronicleproject.com, or .org, I'm sorry.
Yeah. You can also type that in on YouTube, and you can, I think there's several interviews with Randy Morgans.
Oh, good, okay.
That you can see from the U.S.
Yeah, because I'm thinking it would take a whole library of interviews to really get all this information in. When we first talked the other day, we spent, 2.5 hours talking, just going through all this stuff. It's really mind-boggling.
Yeah, I thought I'd pre-prepare you because, as you said, there's so many directions you can go with this. You can go for hours. I was with one gentleman that was 3 hours in, and we finally had to quit.
Yeah.
And we still haven't scratched the surface.
Yeah, yeah. It's we'll talk again, I'm sure. But that's the thing is when people click over and start getting into your website, they need to be prepared for the fact that there is a lot of information.
Right, and as I said before, go to the research notes before anything else. Please don't, because if you don't understand, the research notes explain how it was found, why it works, why it's proof this is not a human language, and it proves substantially no human being could have created this, not unless they had a supercomputer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even beyond the supercomputer, but just the ideas, the concepts that are wrapped up in it, having names that are significant in several different versions, and a language that tells you what it means just by learning the language, learning the alphabet.
Yeah, and another thing that's very interesting is that the rules for how the language works are actually written in the alphabet itself. And I'll give you an example of one of them. I had a newsletter. By the way, every month we have a newsletter right on our page, on our main page. It changes every month, so you click on it and you can read what we've discovered for this month, what we're working on. And so when if you know the Hebrew language, there are certain letters that if they're on the end of a word, they're a different shape than if they're in the middle of a word. And it didn't make any sense to people why that existed. And the more we looked at it, the more we realized that the ones that had the letter on the end that changed were actually audible when you heard, and I'll give you an example of audible versus inaudible. If you have the word ra, which means to perceive, and then you put an H on the end of it, what is the most notable part of to perceive, which would be to see, then I pronounce, the first one would be pronounced Ra. Now, if I put an H on the end, I pronounce Ra. Did you hear the H?
Yeah, with the H,
Very hard to hear, isn't it?
It is, but I'm attuned to it because Indonesian has the same thing.
Right. So then it dawned on us that there was most likely a vowel pronounced after the words. Now, to simplify the words, because right now the pronunciations, this are not the original pronunciations. These are the pronunciations that we have now. To simplify it, what we did is we took a simple sound that was from the Arabic language. They still use the A sound a lot, the short A. And we figured Arabic is almost exactly the same as Hebrew, and it's an extension of Hebrew, being that the Arabic people came from Abraham. So when we checked, it turns out the Arabic language works exactly the same as the Hebrew language.
Oh, no, that's interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But it does have variances. Now, when you take a word with the H on the end of it, it's hard to hear. But if you add the A sound, so instead of saying Ra, I would say Raha. How you can hear it.
Yeah.
But there are certain letters that's not necessary for. And, for example, if you have the K sound at the end of it, then it's Rak. You can hear that.
Yeah.
So each of the letters that has the sound that is audible, it has a different form at the end.
Okay.
So what we did is there's a specific way in the alphabet. So we took them out and left the spaces between them as it was. And what it says is that, so we ran it through the SDH to hear what it would say, and I'll paraphrase, it says that when you pronounce them, you can leave the sound open at the end. They are designed to be open at the end, to not have a sound after them.
Wow.
So the instructions for the alphabet are actually embedded in the alphabet itself if you pick the specific letters and drop them down and then read what it says.
That's mind-blowing.
It is, and on more than occasion we have found that, and it just blows my mind. Now, if only we can find, this is the last rule we need, if we can find how to know if something is a prefix word or a suffix word, that would be it. That would be the discovery that could change everything. Right now, the average person at home can't do it because unless you're versed in Hebrew, you can't see the word in among the word. It's like looking at one of those puzzles where there's a whole bunch of letters on the page in a square area.
Oh, yeah.
Circle words. That's in essence what it's like, because you can look at that page and you'll see a word in among there. So, oh, I see that word, and you can just circle it immediately. And if you've been working with Hebrew long enough, you could see the word.
Yeah, okay.
But without that, it becomes way complex, and I have no way of explaining to somebody how to see that, which drives me crazy, because I'd rather have everybody be able to go home and take the word, their favorite line, and do this. And if we can find that one rule, that's the only rule that we're sitting on that we haven't discovered yet, and it's driving me crazy.
Yeah. I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah, because instantly that would make it accessible to every person out there who wanted it. Because you could sit down and say, well, this is paired with this, and so immediately this one here, there is something we do know, and that is that there's only certain letters that can be prefixes. The words that are prefixes can be used as suffixes. Wow. And those are like the the bait, the B sound, the H sound, the Y sound, trying to think without looking at them straight now, the M sound, the N sound. We know all of these are suffixes and prefixes, so if a word starts with anything other than those, then you know for a fact that that word starts there, and that can be done quite easily. So that part people can know, but other than that, I'm still waiting on that. I keep saying if any Elohim is listening out there, and
wants to pop in and hand you the rule book.
Hand me the rule book and a dictionary with an English subsection in it, I would be thrilled. And we'll publish it online as long as you're not working for the Nakash.
And by the way, could they stick around and answer a few questions?
You know, I could even let them go immediately as long as I had that book. I'm not that greedy. Yeah, Bill Kennedy.
Yeah. Yeah, and where is the Hope Diamond and all that good stuff?
The Hope Diamond, yeah. Oh.
Well,
Actually,
Christopher,
they probably say, "How do I know? I'm just a Malachi."
yeah, I'm just running errands here, buddy.
I'm just running.
By the way, where's my tip?
Here's $5 then.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Well, Christopher,
Yeah.
you know, we've gone a little over an hour now, so I don't want to push it too far because we could go another 2 hours and still not really hit on everything.
Yeah.
But I hope you will join us again.
Okay.
We'll talk more, and maybe we can come up with another hour's worth of programming that we could fit in to post up.
Yeah. I'd like everybody to know out there that if you're incredibly angry with what you've just heard and you want me dead, our email, our email is right on the site, and you can send me the letter. Please don't send them to Mr. B here. That's really unfair. He's just the moderator or the interviewer. And so people can send us letters and ask us any question they want. We actually will answer every email that is sent to us, including the really nasty ones, and we have gotten them. But I will still answer this. Even if you're a psychopath. I did get a letter from a psychopath once, and it was a little scary. But we do answer every query and every letter, and we try to do it with as much sensitivity as possible. So if people out there have any questions or whatever, they can send them to us. It's right on the website on the front page, and you'll find it. It's respondtochronicle@gmail.com.
Yeah, which is exactly how I found you, so I know it works. Well, Christopher, thank you very, very much. It's been a fascinating hour and 15 minutes or so, and you know, our previous discussions, and I'm sure we'll have more, are really enlightening, just mind-blowing information. But I really hope that listeners will pop over. Of course, my blog will have links to your site. So if they are listening to this, and they'll immediately have the information to get on your site, thechronicleproject.org. And I hope people will go just because, you know, the truth will set you free, and it really does.
You'll heard first.
Well, thank you very much, and I'll let you get on with your evening. I'm going to go take a shower and get ready for work. Part of the joys of living half a planet apart.
Yeah, and it's been fun. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you. And now, if that don't shake you out of your tree, nothing will. God is a contractor with 18,000 terraformed planets under his belt. Satan is a project manager who decided to go rogue because, well, the Earth was such a fine product. What's more, the Rift has set up a legal battle of cosmic proportions, and the verdict has yet to be read out. On top of that, the evidence has been sitting in front of our faces for millennia. It's a feast of brain food to mentally chew on, and the implications are more profound than, well, anything else we can think of. On our next program, we'll be discussing the hidden economic and geopolitical war raging around us with a guest that will, well, really shake the boots off our fellow Farsiders. In the meantime, keep watching our companion blog at algenguy.blogspot.com for original articles and analysis of world events. We are completely supported by readers and listeners, so if you feel so moved, click on the PayPal donate button on the blog site to help us grow. Also, we take listener suggestions for future guests, so if there's someone that you really want to hear from or a topic you want to hear about, please send it in to our address, which you'll find at the top of the blog, and we'll certainly get in touch with the experts and see if we can't get them on the show. And thanks for coming over to the far side. We're really glad you could join us. And remember, to think outside the box means someone put you inside of one in the first place. Senpai Dumpa.